Hello friends and welcome to today's video. In this video, I will be teaching you pawn endgames. I have started a new series about endgames for your level, so make sure to check out the first two videos if you haven't already. Also, stay tuned and watch till the end for the answer in the second part. Let's get started. Hey friends, my name is Ishan and today I will be teaching you pawn endgames. Now, most of you upon hearing the word endgame already start snoring and you don't want to learn endgames. It's pretty boring, but the truth is endgames are really important. Here's an example why. If you make a mistake in the opening, you have chances to come back in the middle game. If you make a mistake in the middle game, you have some chances to come back in the end game. But if you make a mistake in the end game, where can you get chances to come back? You'll have to try your luck in the next game, which is not what we want. So end games are really important because they're very decisive. A small error in a king and pawn end game can cost you a half or even a full point. Plus, when you reach these end games, you are usually in severe time trouble as most of your time has been dedicated to the opening and middle game, leaving very little time for your end game. So you need to know how to play these positions accurately and by heart so that you will be able to navigate your way through time trouble as well. So without any further ado, let's get started. So I have shared my screen here and you can see the position. So in this position, first of all, we need to find what are the key squares. So if you look carefully, the key squares are C8, C7 and C6, because these are the squares where if you reach, then your victory is guaranteed. Now, in the previous video, we already talked about the concept of major line. Let me explain it to you again. Major line is usually the line on which the middle key square lies. So when there are a set of three adjacent key squares, the middle one, in this case the C7 square, is usually on the major line. So in this case the major line is 7th rank, and if the key squares were on E6, F6 and G6 for example, then the major line would be the F file because the F6 square is the middle key square. So the first move that white should play is King F5. This forces black to go on the 6th rank and thus we can get the opposition. And then it's just a matter of converting the opposition into a close opposition. So after King F5, let's say he plays King B6. There are a lot of options for in the first move. So if you said King D6, then King B6 is a simple draw. He will just shadow you wherever you go. And King E6 also draws to King A6. King F6, King B6 is a draw. And if you decide to go on the 4th rank, then he can play King B6, and then wherever you play, let's say you play here, then he can just play King B7 and it's a draw, because the moment you step onto the 6th rank, he is in the position to take the correct square which will get him the opposition. And if you play King F5, which is the correct move, then he has no option but to go to the 6th rank. So let's say he plays King B6, then you can simply play King F6 when the opposition is yours. If you play something like King E6, then it would be a big blunder, because then King A6 would draw the game. Let's say King D7, King B7, King D6, King B6, King E5, and now instead of going back to the 5th rank, black can play King A7, where he will wait for you to come to the 6th rank and then only he will take the opposition. Thus that doesn't work. So King F6 is the only move to win after King B6. And now it's a standard procedure of converting the distant opposition into close opposition. So King B7, King F7, King B6, King E8. The point is we are simply threatening to go to C8, so he can't keep the opposition and he has to thus give up the opposition to us again. And also he can't play King C6 because the pawn is there. And one more thing, if you play King E7, then King A7 is a draw, because again he gets the opposition. So the best move to win is king e8. Now after king a7 you can play king e7, and if you play something like king c7, then king e7, king b8, king d8, king b7, king d7, and you win, because wherever he goes you can take the other key square. So going back, after king a7 you can simply play king e7. Again king d7 would throw it all away because he can take the opposition. So king e7 is correct, king a8 and king d6. Now ideally he would like to play king b8 and maintain the opposition, but the problem is the c6 pawn is already immediately hanging, so he must defend it, king b7. And now king d7, the important move. If you take king takes c5, then he can draw the game with king c7. When even if the pawns are equal, he has the opposition and thus he can draw. So important is king d7. When after king b6, king c8, we reach a key square and we will thus win his pawns. So for example, after he plays any move, we can just win his pawns in quick succession and thus winning the game, as you can see. Moving on, we come to a similar position instead, but instead of the black king being on a5, it is on a7, and now we can see that black can draw easily with king b7. And the point is, the moment white goes to the 6th rank, black can take the opposition, so white has no hope of winning here. So after something like king e6, black can play king a6, and we have already seen how this draws in the previous example. Okay, now here is one example of a actual game that was played between two GMs. I know you must be thinking, why are there rooks and queens on a pawn endgame? But let me explain myself. So black here thought that after queen into b4, the resulting pawn endgame would be a win for him. But before I show you why that's wrong, I want to show the correct answer, which is queen c3. Now I know this is a bit off topic, but just for the sake of it, I am telling you the correct move. And after something like rook b5 check, king d4, rook b4 check, king d3, if he plays ba4, then queen a3 is a standard win in the rook and pawn versus queen endgame, which we will come to much later in this series. And if he takes ba4 directly, then we can still take queen a3, rook b5, king c4, and this is a standard winning position of the queen versus rook endgame. But don't worry yourself about that, that is a much later part of this series, and you don't even need that much knowledge, because at your level you will mostly finish it in the early endgame rather than simplifying to queen versus rook. So after queen b4, white realized that he could draw, so obviously a b4, you can't play anything else. A cross b3, king b2 is pretty much forced, else black will take the b4 pawn, king c4, king a3 and b2. Okay, now for those of you who think king c3 is correct, I am sorry, it's a stalemate, so that doesn't work. So the only move to keep fighting for the win is b2, and this was where the black GM miscalculated. He thought that white would have to take king b2 and then black can just take king b4 and win the game, because he has the opposition, and on the next move he will get the key square. What he forgot to consider was the possibility of king a2, which is a very nice move. The point being that we will wait for black to capture the pawn, and thus when we capture on b2 after king b4, then we will have the opposition and we can draw. So if he plays something like king c3, which happened in the game, king b1, king into b4, obviously king b3 is stalemate, so king into b4, king into b2, and it's a draw. A standard king versus king and pawn draw. So moving on, now we reach another GM versus GM encounter, where black could have won easily by playing rook a3, when after king e4, f5 check, king d4, you can't play king f4 because king f6 is a zugzwang, which basically means white has no good move, and essentially his rook is trapped. So king d4, king f6, king c4, rook e3, king d4, rook e4, and after rook g4, rook into g4, h into g4, we can simply win this pawn endgame with a breakthrough. So instead, what happened in the game was rook f5, which is a mistake, because after king e4, rook into g5, h into g5, h into g5, white has the opposition, but black thought he could win by playing f6. But after g f6, king f6, king f4, g5 check, king f3, king f7, king f2, king e6, king e2, king d6, king d2, king c5, king e3, which is the move he missed. Black realized that he has no way to get through to the pawn on g3, and thus it's a draw. So this is the next puzzle of this series. I want you to take your time. It's black to play, and even though black looks better, you must think carefully about the position before you make any hasty conclusions. So we will look at the answer of this in the next video. And now here is a little bit of a more complicated position. So white logically plays king e4. If you play something like g3, then after takes, it's a simple draw, because neither side can win the other side's pawn. So we will just shuffle around. Even though white has the opposition, it doesn't matter. He can just go anywhere. Even if white wins the pawn, we have already seen how this is a draw in the first video, I believe, and this is a draw. So g3 doesn't work. So the logical other move is king e4. When after king g4, black has the opposition. So in order to win this, white needs to have the opposition. So how should we take it? King d5. For those of you who said king e5, they are also correct, but it's just a little bit longer than the game continuation. And after this, he has to play something like king g5, and we get the opposition, and we will see how that wins. So king g4 and then king d5, and after, let's say if he plays king g3, then king e5 is a simple win, because king g4, king f6, king h4, king f5, king g3, king g5, and once he takes on g4, g2, we can take on f4, take on b5 and win the game. So if he plays king f5, then we can just play king d4, taking advantage that he cannot shadow us by playing king f4, and after king g5, king e5, and we win in the same manner. So the only logical move left for him is king h5, taking the distant opposition, and now we play king c6. The point being, he would like to continue opposing us by playing king g6, but what happens is he is too far from the g2 pawn, and we can take on b5 and win the game. So he must keep his eyes set on the g2 pawn, when we can take the opposition and do a standard outflanking maneuver, and we get the opposition and we win the game. So now let's discuss the answer of the puzzle that was given in the last video. So this is the puzzle, and here it was white to play. The only move that wins is king h1. If you play king f1, then what happens is after king d2, king f2, king d3, black is taking advantage that you cannot play king f3 and continue opposing him. So after king d3, king e3, king g4 or king g2, and king f1, king g4, king f2. Either way, black gets the opposition and wins the game. So the only move to keep opposing him is king h1, with the idea that after king d2, king h2, king d3, king s3, king e2, king g2, we can continue opposing him, and this is a draw because he can't make any progress. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to like and subscribe so I can keep making more content like this. See you in the next video. Bye.